For this project, you just need your value technique worksheet, and then you're going to need some supplies. Now this is going to be just so you can kind of play around with these drawing utensils. You don't need this to look perfect when you're done. It's really just some time for you to experiment with some different things you might not have used before you start actually trying to draw something. So I'm going to tell you what you need to get started. The first thing you need is just a regular number 2 pencil. If you look on the side of some number 2 pencils, they have like a HB up there. This is actually right in the middle of the grades of drawing pencils. So drawing pencils come in a wide range. If you have a set of drawing pencils, you might have seen they have numbers followed by a letter. So this is a 6H pencil. The H stands for hard. The harder the pencil, the lighter the mark will be. So if I were to draw with these using about the same amount of pressure, you can see this line comes out lighter than the number 2 pencil. So as your grade goes up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's going to get lighter as the numbers go up. On the other side of the spectrum, this is actually your General's Layout pencil is equivalent to about a 6B. I know it doesn't say 6B on it, but that's what it is. So this is going to make a much darker mark, even though I'm using about the same amount of pressure on it. Keep in mind, when you're drawing, the lighter the mark, the easier it is to erase. The darker the mark, the harder it is to erase. So that's why there's so many different grades, is because you're going to need different grades for different things. For our purposes though, about 3 pencils should be fine for what you're drawing. But if you really like drawing with pencils, you might want to get one of the sets. They're not very expensive and they come with a lot of pencils with all different numbers. The next thing you need is a stump. Sometimes you might also see these called tortillons. This is used for shading. You need a eraser. You're gonna actually have 3 different erasers. So you have your kneaded eraser. This is good because you can kind of bend it and mold it with your fingers, so you can make a point. If you want to erase something small, you can make it flat where you can kind of actually dab the graphite off of your paper. We'll experiment with some of those things. This is called a gum eraser. This is good for large areas. Both of these erasers are very soft. They will not tear up the top of your paper. If you get too aggressive with your eraser or you use the wrong kind of eraser, you can tear up the grain of the paper, and then your graphite isn't going to lay down as smooth when you go back over it. Then we have, you'll see these called a stick eraser sometimes, or a pen eraser. It has a very fine tips that you can erase a really small portion without erasing the things around it. One of the things that we're gonna talk about today is you usually think of using an eraser just for mistakes, getting rid of something that you don't want there. But artists actually use erasers a lot of times as drawing tools themselves. So think of it not just as something that you use to erase mistakes, but something you can use to actually add to your drawings. Next thing you need is a cotton ball and a Q-tip. We're going to use these shading a little bit like we're using the stump to just help spread and smooth your graphite. And then you also need a white colored pencil and a black colored pencil. Okay, be sure to put your name on your paper. And then the first thing you'll see is value is. Value is the lightness and darkness in art. So playing around with values and using all these different utensils, it's going to give you a wide range of ways to change how light or how dark you're making something. It's really good when you're first learning how to draw and shade to use black and white, because then you're only worried about basically two colors. And in our case, we are not going to be using a white except when we use our colored pencils. So you're really only using one thing and having to worry about one thing at a time. So the first thing you need is your number 2 pencil. I want you on this one to practice changing your pressure as you go across. So on the left side, you're gonna make it as dark as you possibly can. And then as you work your way over, I want you to just gradually change your pressure so that it starts to get lighter and lighter as you work your way across. Also make sure when you're shading to turn your pencil on its side. If you try to shade with the pencil on its end, it's really hard to change the pressure, and it makes lines instead of giving you this gradual kind of even shading like you want. So as you can see, I'm just slowly getting lighter and lighter with my pressure as I work my way across. And then you want to end with it totally white, nothing there. Another thing you can do if you really want to make it smooth, but you have to be careful when you're working with, because you don't want to change this nice kind of shading that we've got going across gradually. You don't want to make it any darker really, but you can shade going the other direction so that you can really smooth it out and get in those lines. I know you probably learned when you were little to not color different directions, but coloring in different directions can really help you smooth things out if that's the look that you're going for. So here with the shading, we were going for a smooth look. Now down here, hatching is actually, we want it to have lines. So with hatching, the closer together the lines are, the darker it will be. And obviously, the further apart the lines are, the lighter it'll be. So I want you to just go across, and as you're going across, space those lines out further and further. You can also get a little lighter with your pressure. Think about some of the things that you might use hatching for, like drawing hair or maybe drawing grass, anything that would have kind of a texture to it. The next one is cross hatching, and it's just like what it sounds, it's hatching, except you cross your lines over each other. So you can kind of start going one way first if you want, get lighter and lighter and spread them out as you go across, and then go back the other way. Maybe in your head while you're doing this, think of some different things that you might use cross hatching for. What would have that texture? Maybe cloth or a basket. Sometimes you might want to just make things that are actually smooth look like they have texture, because that's the way that you want to make it look with your art. Okay, the next one is scribbles. I'm using the number 2 for all of these, by the way. The next one, we're gonna switch it up. So with scribbles, again, just start with them dark and really close together, and as you work your way over, you can spread them apart and also change the pressure to make your scribbles lighter until they kind of fade away. Now before we switch pencils, I want to go back up to the circles. So this, I just kind of gave you a circle so you could practice shading. I want you to try to make this look like a 3D sphere. We're gonna pretend like our light is coming from this direction. So our sun is kind of up here shining on these spheres. And so this side is gonna be our darkest side. You can start shading from there. And then I want you to get lighter as you go over, and then kind of try to leave a highlight on it. This will just give you a little more practice, kind of gradually changing that pressure as you shade. Now this one's gonna be kind of hard, hatching on a curved surface. It's a little harder. Then your cross hatching. I probably did a little cross hatching with the last one. It's kind of hard with the curve to keep it totally going one direction. And then your squiggles. When you're shading, it's a lot of times good to start at the darkest spot and then work to where it's lighter. That's how I like to start anyway. There's not necessarily a right and a wrong way to do it. Okay, so now that you have a little practice shading, feel free to kind of pause this and go back and spend a little more time on those if you want. Now you want to get your 6H pencil. So remember, this is the one that is going to be the lightest pencil. So even if you press really hard over here, you're not going to get as dark of a mark as you did with the other one. And it's gonna, with your number 2. And as you work your way over, it's gonna get really light really fast. Okay, then the next one is shading with a soft pencil. So get your General's Layout pencil for this one. You'll notice this one is much darker than the number 2. So this one's gonna be more of a challenge to go lighter as we go across. Now, of course, when you're drawing something, it's really good to use all the pencils together so that you can use the lighter ones for the lighter areas and the darker one for the darkest areas. But you still can get really light even with this dark pencil by changing the pressure. So another thing I want you to notice, one of the reasons we chose for you to have this General's Layout pencil is because it isn't as shiny as the others. So it may be hard to see on the camera, but if you tilt your paper, especially in the light, you'll see that the number 2 pencil is very shiny where it's really dark. And this General Layout pencil, it has a little bit of a sheen, but not quite as much. And this makes a difference when you're drawing, you know, especially like portraits and things where you want your dark values to be really dark. If you have a portrait or something and the darkest parts are reflecting a lot of light, that's going to change how your picture looks. And sometimes that may be the look that you want it to have, but most of the time when you make something really, really dark, you want it to stay looking dark no matter what angle or what kind of lighting you're looking at it under. So that's why this General's Layout pencil is a really good pencil. Charcoal is really a lot better about that than graphite, but charcoal is really, really messy. So we're not gonna tackle charcoal quite yet, but we may have some time to work with that later in the year. Oh, we need to do our spheres. I'm gonna go ahead and do this dark one. And we're lighter. It also helps sometimes when you're shading something to turn your paper instead of trying to, you know, manipulate your hand in a way that isn't comfortable. And go back to your 6H pencil for this sphere up here. And again, I want you to notice like how much harder it is to shade using only this super light pencil. That's just really not what it's made to do. And again, you might want to go and spend some more time in getting these really smooth, making them look really nice. I'm kind of hurrying because I don't want this video to be way too long. Okay, the next thing is blending using a stump. And I'm going to go ahead and keep using this General Layout pencil. I just like how smooth it is and easy to shade with it is, and it shows up good on the camera as well. Okay, so the mistake a lot of people use when they're trying to use a stump, they realize it's for shading. And so what they do is they just color, you know, as dark as they can, and then they try to totally shade with the stump instead of using pressure and then using the stump just to blend it out. So as you can see, I'm not gonna be able to get my graphite all the way to the end like I want it to be using just the stump. So I want you to do your shading just like you did up above. You know, just gradually working across, changing your pressure. Then you may not have to go quite as far over. This will go a little further for you. But now you can smooth that graphite with your stump, and you can just see how much smoother you can get your shading using your stump than you could just using the pressure of your pencil. Now, once your stump has some graphite on it, you can actually use your stump to draw with all by itself. if you want to draw some like really light areas where you don't get a lot of definition. So this is a really good tool to use. Let's make our sphere. Now this one we're gonna be able to make look really nice and clean. And smooth out with that stump. Another thing you can do is add a little shadow. As the light's coming from this direction, that means our shadow would be over here. Okay, now we're getting to the erasers. So I want you to go ahead and shade all the way across again, just like we did before. And now you can practice with your different erasers. So this one is good for kind of dabbing off some of the graphite. You can see it doesn't take it all off. So this isn't gonna be your best eraser for, I made a mistake, now I want all the lead off. It's really for, you know, just, oh, I want that area to be a little lighter, that kind of thing. Now you can get a little more off if you press it into a point, and then you can use that point to erase. What I want you to notice is you can get almost all of the graphite off here where I went light. Over here where I went as dark as I could, I can't pull all that off. The more I try to pull that off, the more I'm gonna damage the top of my paper. And then if I try to draw on top of that again, it's not gonna come out smooth and behave the way that it does before I damage the top of my paper. So a good rule is to just, except on those areas where you're sure they're gonna be really, really dark, start light. You can always add more graphite, but it's harder to pick up a lot of graphite in a place where you decided you didn't want it. So like, especially on these highlights, I wouldn't color the whole circle or sphere and then try to pull that highlight up. I'm never gonna get back to white with just an eraser. The next kind of eraser I want you to try is your gum eraser. So this one you can see pulls up quite a bit more lead or graphite, and you could actually almost get this back to white, especially over here where I went light. So now I'm gonna put some down again and kind of smooth it back out, just so I can show you the stick eraser. So this is one of my favorite erasers, just because they're really good about pulling up a lot of graphite, and you can do little detail type things with them. This is a really good tool for, like, if you're drawing hair, you can pull some highlights back up out of your hair. You can put a highlight back in if you've drawn lightly enough. So on your little spheres over here, I gave you 2. You're more than welcome to use 2 if you would like. But I'm only gonna color in 1. So let's say, you know, I colored all of that in. And then I decided I wanted to put a highlight in. You can use your pen eraser to pull some of that back up. But I want you to notice how I can't get it as light as this one above where I totally left it white. You're never going to get it all the way back to as light as the paper was before then. You do a little bit, but it's never going to be quite the same. So on your areas where you want them to be really white, you've got to make sure that you leave them white from the beginning. So it just kind of shows how you can kind of shade and lighten with your eraser. Okay, the next one is filling in with a cotton ball. And we're not gonna really try to shade with this one, but what I want you to do is on one of these up here, where you have a lot of graphite, there may not be enough graphite on there. There's not. So what I'm gonna do is actually on this other piece of paper, I'm gonna make like a really dark spot with your lead, and then use that spot to get some lead on your cotton ball, and then use that to put the graphite on your paper. So it's just gonna lay down a really, really light shade of gray. This is really good for skin tones because if you notice, it's really smooth. It's not at all scratchy. So if you want something that's really, really light and really, really smooth, this is a really good way to apply the graphite to your paper. You'll notice you can erase into this very easily, more easily than you can if you color it. So there's shading with your cotton ball. You can do something over here with this if you want. This is also a really good way. It's sometimes kind of daunting to start with a totally white piece of paper. If you have especially like a gradual shade on your picture that you're drawing, it's a really good way to start, to just apply, you know, that light shade of gray. You can even pull your highlights back out from the beginning if you want, and then go in and do your shading on top of that light shade of gray, rather than trying to start on blank white paper. You can also use your cotton ball kind of like you do your stump to smooth. Just notice I've covered up my highlight, so I'm gonna pull my highlight back out of there. And so that's just another tool you can use when you're drawing. As you get a cotton ball, you can use your Q-tip. You can use your Q-tip the same way, kind of like a stump. Get a little smoother with your stump. Since it has a tip, you can get a little bit more detailed with it and actually draw with it. This has a little smoother end. Okay, the last thing is shading with colored pencils. So I wanted you to get a chance to use your colored pencils. just because it's quite a bit different than shading with just graphite. So with your black colored pencil, start on this side, gradually work your way over. Now your black colored pencil is gonna go a really long way, so I'm not gonna go as far with the black colored pencil as I did with the graphite. And then you can start over on this side with your white, start working your way over. And you can just kind of go back and forth with your pencils until you are happy with the shade. I'm gonna go back in and kind of just keep smoothing. You can see when I go over the black with the white, doesn't make it too much lighter, but the black quickly makes it darker. So the white is really good for just smoothing it out. The black is good for actually changing the darkness. All right, now I want you to try to do your sphere. And remember to be careful about putting how much black you put down, because that black is going to go a long way. Really smooth with your white. Go back in and put a little shadow. The shadow just makes it look like it's actually 3D. And there you go.